And this was the final nail in the coffin for Southampton, really. As soon as this happened, Chelsea started to take over and really, really dominated the game. Lads, lasses, and the rest of the masses, welcome back to another tactical breakdown. Today we're going to be breaking down Chelsea versus Southampton and seeing the key tactical reasons as to why Chelsea largely controlled this game. Alright, so let's talk about the team a little bit first, because the lineup was obviously different and the setup that we kind of used was different in terms of how we played out of possession and how we played in possession. Let's talk about out of possession first, because that's easier to kind of show. Now, the key differences between this team and the team that we played versus Aston Villa is the fact that not only do we have Malo Gusto back, and we know that he's obviously going to be the player that inverts into midfield, but we have no out-and-out striker, with Nkunku filling in for Jackson. We also have Felix on the left-hand side instead of a pure winger, which we'll kind of talk about later and how his role kind of impacted the way we played as a team. And then, of course, we have Enzo Caicedo in the middle with Palmer, who's obviously going to kind of go into this 10 role as the game progresses. Now, out of possession, and I'll talk about this quickly because we weren't out of possession for much of this game. For the majority of the time, the game was either contested by both teams or controlled by Chelsea. So we're going to talk about how we kind of set up. We went back into almost a 4-2-2-2 is what I would kind of class it as. We would see Caicedo and Enzo drop into these two holding midfield roles. We'd see Maresca drop nice and deep into this right mid spot. It's almost like a 4-4-2, but he would get a little bit higher at times too and kind of play a bit here. Felix would obviously do the same on the opposite side. Again, because of him being a bit more of a central player, he would kind of drop a little bit closer into this area rather than actually being back here. But it kind of ends up looking like a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-2-2 as those guys go up a little bit higher. And then obviously Nkunku and Palmer would be the two that's kind of left up top. But as I said, we didn't really play this way for the majority of the time because we didn't really lose the ball that much, and when we did, it was kind of in transition and we were kind of a little bit all over the place and not really actually settling into a certain formation when that happened. I don't think that that Southampton really had many extended spells of possession in this game where we kind of had to sit back into our shape and actually absorb pressure. What's more interesting is how we set up when we go forward and when we were in possession. And again, we can bring the players back to where they were because it kind of shifts around a lot. Now, obviously, as we say, Gusto will always be the player that kind of inverts here. We get Enzo coming up into this inside 10 alongside Palmer, with Caicedo going over to the left-hand side and Gusto coming into this box midfield. We've talked about this box midfield before and the man advantages that we can gather from this because we play 4 midfielders against the majority of teams which play 3 in the midfield. Again, with Southampton, they also played a 3 in midfield, but they kind of counteracted this with a bit of interesting play, which I'll kind of highlight in a little bit concerning one player in their back line. And once we did this, we'd obviously shift into a back 3, with Cucurella being the left-hand-sided centre-back and Disasi as this right-hand-sided centre-back, with Tosin being able to be the line-breaking passer in the centre of the defence. Now, let's talk about Southampton's setup a tiny bit first before we delve into the real reasons that we kind of won this game. I want to preface this video by saying that Southampton were really affected by absentees. Not only did they have 3 of their best players, Harwood Bellis, Dibbling and Downs, all suspended, but they had a very depleted team overall with loads of injuries. Obviously, they had not their first choice goalkeeper in goal. They had to kind of make a makeshift midfield with Ryan Fraser being in there, and it was not obviously the strongest Southampton team, and it kind of impacted the way that they were able to play because they have been doing a little bit better in recent times, obviously getting a draw against Brighton recently being one of those good results, which is a decent result for them, and we kind of expected that they might have been able to give us a bit of a better fight if they had those players in this setup, but they obviously didn't. Now, they did actually cause us some issues in the first half, and obviously that being mainly because of one player in particular. Obviously we get Joe Aribo, who in the lineup was said to be playing on this right hand side. I think he was kind of roaming. He was playing wherever, really. He kind of moved around as the team moved around. And we'd see Ryan Fraser here with Cameron Archer and Adam Armstrong up top, and they would play into this 5-3-2 time system, but it was a bit more fluid than that. They didn't really stay like this, and obviously they wanted to get Manning and Bree really high when they could. The interesting thing about their setup though is the position of Kyle Walker-Peters. Now, He's obviously not naturally a centre-back, he's naturally a right full-back, and he's playing on this left-hand side in a back three, and it seems a bit weird. Well, the reason for that is because the way that they were playing when they actually had the ball was quite interesting. They would obviously push really, really high up the pitch, and once they were kind of into these more advanced positions, with Fraser kind of coming over into this midfield role, he kind of was mixing between going wide, where he kind of operates usually as a wide player, or going into a central role, central midfield role, and kind of letting Fernandes and Aribo kind of play as these two holding roles. Manning would obviously get really, really high as a left wing back and try and get into advanced areas. But the thing which is so interesting about this is that as they push up their centre backs up the pitch, Kyle Walker-Peters, instead of staying as a centre back, he would actually come into midfield. He was playing this really bizarre role, which we should be kind of used to, that Malo Gusto kind of plays, where we get an inverted defender into midfield, and he was being the one that was kind of not being picked up half the time because we weren't really expecting him to be there. And obviously the goal eventually comes for Joe Aribo from Walker-Peters actually passing it through to him after getting into some space and getting past Enzo, who would kind of come back into this role. And then obviously Aribo gets his goal from near the edge of the box with a nice Trivela shot akin to Enzo Fernandez in the Aston Villa game. And they had a few opportunities like that in the first half, where they kind of created opportunities from getting the ball out wide and getting past Disasi or Enzo, whoever was over here. Obviously Gusto, when he was kind of getting back into his defensive position here to try and deal with that, he was kind of getting overrun and wasn't getting back quick enough, and Manning, Archer and Walker-Peters in this little triangle on the right hand side was actually, or their left hand side, was actually causing us quite a lot of issues. Obviously we score our first goal from a set piece, from a corner, and it's Axel Disasi who sneaks in at the front post to get his goal. Not much to analyse there other than just a very good movement from Axel Disasi, very good delivery from Enzo Fernandez, who gets another assist to his name this season. And obviously they get the equaliser with Aribo. We obviously get another goal in that first half, which I'll talk about a little bit later because it kind of highlights one of the main issues with how Southampton played and how we played in order to actually get our goals in this game. And we'll, as I said, I'll kind of highlight that a little bit later. But apart from this, those 3 goals that went in the first half, wasn't much to kind of analyse. It was very much a sense of Southampton trying to counter-attack us, trying to be quick on the counter, and us trying to break through this kind of back 5 until the 39th minute of the half. And the big obvious elephant in the room is Stevens getting himself sent off. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this decision and whether this is a red card or not, from what I've seen online. This is 100% a red card. It's the same thing as gouging someone's eyes or hitting someone below the belt. You're not allowed to pull on someone's hair, no matter how simple or how little you've done it. You're not allowed to do it. He gets sent off straight off the pitch, and now this is where we really start to take over, because as we'll kind of talk about how we were trying to create chances in this game, we'll show how this is much easier now. We've obviously got the extra man here and we get more space because they have less players here. Now the setup of Southampton changes because of the red card, and they move into a more traditional back 4 with Kyle Walker-Peters going out to this right hand side, Bree moving over from the right wing back spot into right centre back, Wood playing as a left centre back, and Manning staying where he was as a more traditional left back. Now Fraser and Aribo would be the 2 deeper players here in the midfield, and Fernandes would go a little bit higher up with Archer and Armstrong kind of trying to feed off the late balls. I've not put them in just for clarity's sake, but this is kind of the way they set up. And now we can kind of talk about how Chelsea played in possession a little bit more in depth as we kind of speak about how we create our chances. Now Palmer and this box midfield that we kind of see obviously rotates into this more central position with Gusto going higher. We leave Caicedo as this lone defensive midfielder, and Enzo and Gusto will kind of play a little bit higher up here. Now what we end up seeing, and this is really interesting because it's different to what we've usually seen, and because of how narrow Felix likes to be and how narrow he usually is as a player, he would come more inside, and we'd actually see Cucurella being the one that operates this wide space, with Tosin going a bit wider, so same as Disasi and Caicedo playing here. So we're almost playing like a traditional back 4 at this point, because we can afford to push all of our players up a bit higher. Nkunku would obviously stay central, Madueke would get nice and wide, Cucurella would go wide, and Felix and Palmer would play in these little pockets of space in between the defenders and the midfield. Now this is so important, because this is the main thing, and this is one of the main ideas that we kind of used in this game to get through Southampton's backline. Even when they had 5 players at the back here as well, we were always trying to feed it, if we could, through the lines, through this defensive line, into these pockets of space where Felix and Palmer were. Now we found this a little bit difficult at times when they had the 3 midfielders here, but when they didn't and they just had Aribo and Fraser, obviously Fernandes would come back and try and help, but for the most part he was trying to be a bit more offensive and try and get them back into the game. We were basically trying to get it into those 2 central players as much as we could, or get it through to Nkunku, who was also central, but most of the time when we did that, it came from the wide areas first. Now Gusto obviously was going to kind of play in this weird role, because he's not going to play as this midfielder and try and play the passes through. He's more of going to be the off-the-ball runner. He would get a little bit more wide and kind of link up with Madueke, where Caicedo and Enzo would kind of interchange and be the ones that kind of stood here and were trying to kind of find the passes out to the wide players, like Enzo going out to Cucurella, for example, if he got up here, or again trying to be the one that's going to make that line breaking pass to get into these central spaces. Now a lot of the time what we would see is we'd see Caicedo on the ball here and Enzo would be roaming around, and most of the time he'd get onto this right hand side, and the one of the players would press Caicedo, for example, he'd play it through to Enzo. And once we've got this little bit of a break here, and usually it would kind of be actually Fraser who'd kind of step up and try and do this. Once we've got this little bit of space here, we could feed this into Palmer. He could turn, try and get shots off, which we saw him do quite a lot, or try and get it into Felix, who obviously got opportunities. We saw a lot of times the ball going long and Palmer getting into these areas. We obviously saw a very good chance for Joao Felix from across from Palmer from this area into the back post, which he had a free header and did not score somehow. But again, not only just getting the ball into these pockets was one of our main prerogatives, but also getting the ball out wide and having this kind of always the ability to have a 1v1. Now we always talk about the fact that this system tries to create 1v1s. We try and back ourselves to win 1v1s, but especially when we are in this situation where there isn't as many players in the defense, when the ball comes out here to Madueke and Manning has to kind of go out here to deal with him, there is so much space for Palmer. And if Madueke doesn't just burst straight past him or get into the box himself and try and get shot away, which we obviously see him score a lovely curled effort from here after receiving a pass from Felix in the center here, after he gets the ball in a pocket of space, as we kind of spoken about. But it also, as I said, just creates this space for our creative players like Palmer, like Gusto if he's made the overlap into this area of the box, like Felix if he's dropped and Palmer's gone a little bit further forward and Felix has come into the central role, he can kind of get the ball here and we can see passes go through. No matter what it was, we were basically it was a combination of those 2 things over and over and over again, and for some reason the gaps between the midfield of Southampton and their defense was just so large, and they were not learning from their mistakes. And speaking of mistakes, it's kind of the main thing I want to talk about with this game. It wasn't really a good tactical performance from Chelsea for the most part. Instead, what it kind of was Southampton falling apart and us just benefiting from that. There were so many different situations where Southampton could have just cleared the ball, played it out long, tried to protect what they had and try and get a cheeky goal on the counter and maybe equalise late on. But from the starting whistle, they were trying to play this good, neat, intricate football where they passed it out from the back and they progressed it up the pitch and did the big club thing of trying to play good football, and it just doesn't work for them. They don't have the quality to do it, especially with this very depleted, very rotated Southampton side. And the main culprit of this, and the person I'm going to highlight that ironically I haven't actually given a name to, because I don't really ever give the names to the goalkeepers because they're not that involved most of the time, but Lumley in this goalkeeping role was utterly out of his depth in this game, just completely out of his depth. I think this was like his 2nd ever appearance in the Premier League, and he was trying to be tasked as this sweeper keeper, coming out, picking up the ball, passing it and trying to distribute, and he just wasn't good at it. He wasn't either experienced enough at it, or he was a bit too nervous to do this. I'm really not sure why they tried to do it, but he kept giving the ball away. Obviously, we see Nkunku's goal. I spoke about this earlier. Nkunku's goal comes from a mistake from Lumley, passing it straight to one of our players, it getting passed into Nkunku, and he has an open net to put it into the back of the net for 2-1. Now, this kept happening, and the thing which really spoke about this game, and the main thing about this game which we can take from this, is the fact that Southampton, despite making these mistakes, didn't try and change absolutely anything. The manager just decided to be really, really stubborn and continue to play this way. Even when they went down to 10 men and they had this different setup with the 4 at the back, they were still trying to do it, and it was very, very bizarre. Even at 4-1 or 3-1 that we were up, they were still doing this and they weren't learning, and it really reminded me of the game last season against Spurs, who ironically we are next up to play, where we saw that weird high line from Ange Postecoglou's Spurs team once they went down to 10 men and then 9 men, and instead of kind of learning from that situation of us always getting in behind them, they kind of just allowed us to keep doing it, and eventually we battered them. The exact same thing happened here with Southampton, and as much as I would love to delve into the tactics of this game and say that Chelsea won this game because we were finding the men in the space and we were passing the ball well and doing all this and getting our dribbling well with the 1v1s with Madueke, who was man of the match in my opinion in this game, and he was fantastic, we can't really talk about it that much because for the most part it was just Southampton being utterly woeful and giving us goals. And that's kind of frustrating, and I do want to, for the most part, talk about how well we played, but it was just an utter mess from Southampton from start to finish. Not only with them getting the red card in the first place, but the fact they just didn't learn that they couldn't play this way, and they had to just line it and hope that Archer and Armstrong, who are up top, could have fed off of the balls and kind of got some opportunities. Because the one time when they do get into those two in the second half, we actually see Jurgensen make a very good save. This is up when we are 3-1 up in the second half, and they could have easily made this 3-2. He makes a fantastic save. And once that gets to 3-2, maybe we get a bit nervy, maybe they can actually get back into the game, but instead they go back to what they were doing, they don't score this goal, they go back to what they were doing, and it just didn't work for them at all. And all this is not to just discredit Southampton and say that they were terrible, but it was to kind of show how we found it easy because of these little mistakes. And the one mistake that I really want to highlight, and something which I think that they will look at when they look at this game, they'll look at and say we did not do this well enough, was the pressing or the getting out to men when it was out in these wide areas or out in these pockets. Now, the space between the two lines was far too big in general, but once we got it into these spaces here in between the midfield, the centre-backs would not come and try and challenge. They would just back off, giving us way too much space, giving us way too many opportunities, and giving us, our players, way too much time to be able to pick out their passes. Obviously, the Madueke chance, as I said, gets from Felix getting too much time. We see when Sancho comes on, he gets his goal, the 5th goal of this game. He gets his 5th goal from this right-hand side because Manning just doesn't go to him, and he just smashes the ball into the near post because no one's marking him. And for the most part, I will be putting some kind of a little bit of a target on Manning's back here, because he was just a victim of circumstance of him being the left back in this game against Madueke, who was our main avenue of where we were kind of going down. We were always going down this right hand side, less so than the left hand side, because Cucurella isn't as good of a 1v1 player as Madueke, obviously. He was not getting out to Madueke quick enough, and maybe this was out of fear that if he pressed too hard that we would play around them and just kind of get into these kind of positions that we saw Palmer get into in the end. Maybe that's a tactical decision that they made, I'm not sure, I'm not their coach, but it was just so silly to see them just backing off and allowing our creative players in this line just all of this space, and just we could break them down at will, and in fact we did break them down at will. If you look at the stats of this game, I believe Chelsea broke a record for an away team with the most expected goals in Premier League history. That's how many chances they gave us, and admittedly it kind of goes to show how wasteful we were in the fact that we only scored 5 goals. It could have been in double figures, and we've seen Southampton concede a lot of goals in the past. Obviously, there being that 9-0 defeat that they suffered a few seasons ago. We could have absolutely put them to the sword here, and this could have been a very embarrassing result for them as it were, a 5-1 result almost flatters them with how poor they played and how much they allowed us to get into these spaces and pick out passes and be able to just break the lines. And I was speaking about the line breaking. Again, this also happens with Enzo out here, not just in between the spaces, but with Enzo and Caicedo getting on the ball, there was just no pressure on them at all. They were just allowed to kind of get the ball, and when there was a press, it was very lazy. It allowed Enzo to play the ball around players like Fraser, like Aribo, like Fernandez, who would get up here. And they made it so comfortable for us to just recycle the ball around our backline until these opportunities arose, get the ball into these creative players where we have in these central roles, and then get them forward for players like Nkunku, who could dribble through, and he obviously gets Palmer his goal by basically Palmer just stealing it off the line from Nkunku, which they had a bit of a laugh about. But yeah, we get our 4th goal from that, and then obviously the Sancho goal that we see after he just runs up the pitch and smashes it near post. And it was just a case of Southampton not really showing up, and it's upsetting to say, because I do want to, as I said, I want to analyse us specifically, and I want to praise us for how well we played. But despite us playing well in this game, I felt like we were given a massive hand by Southampton and how poor they were overall. This was overall a very professional performance with a rotated side against a team that very well could have been a bogey team for us. We move on to 8th place Tottenham Hotspur, and hopefully we'll be able to keep continuing to ride on this wave of momentum that we've been building recently. I'll be live streaming on this channel before the game on Sunday to give my pre-match thoughts, predictions, and react to the lineups when they come out, so do not miss that. I'll be live about half an hour before the lineups come out. But until then, if you want something else to watch, maybe you can watch one of these 2 videos in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues.